Good morning, and welcome to This Day in History. Today we're going to talk about September 28th, and we're going to start all the way back in 551 BC, when the Chinese philosopher and founder of Confucianism, Confucius, was born in Zulu State, China. He died in 479 BC. That was a long time ago. In 48 BC, Pompey the Great was assassinated. Upon landing in Egypt, the Roman general and politician Pompey was murdered on orders of King Ptolemy of Egypt. During his long career, Pompey the Great displayed exceptional military talents on the battlefield. He fought in Africa and Spain, quelled the slave revolt of Spartacus, cleared the Mediterranean of pirates, and conquered Armenia, Syria, and Palestine. Appointed to organize the newly won Roman territories in the east, he proved a brilliant administrator. In 60 BC, he joined with his rivals Julius Caesar and Marcus Licinius Crassus to form the first triumvirate, and together the trio ruled Rome for 7 years. Caesar's successes aroused Pompey's jealousy, however, leading to the collapse of the political alliance in 53 BC. The Roman Senate supported Pompey and asked Caesar to give up his army, which he refused to do, of course. In January 49 BC, Caesar led his legions across the Rubicon River from Cisalpine Gaul to Italy, thus declaring war against Pompey and his forces. Caesar made early gains in the subsequent civil war, defeating Pompey's army in Italy and Spain, but he was later forced to retreat in Greece. In August 48 BC, with Pompey in pursuit, Caesar paused near Pharsalus, setting up a camp at a strategic location. When Pompey's senatorial forces fell upon Caesar's smaller army, they were entirely routed, and Pompey fled to Egypt. Pompey hoped that King Ptolemy, his former client, would assist him, but the Egyptian king feared offending the victorious Caesar. On September 28, Pompey was invited to leave his ships and come ashore at Pelusium. As he prepared to step onto Egyptian soil, he was treacherously struck down and killed by an officer of Ptolemy. In 1066, William, Duke of Normandy, soon to be known as William the Conqueror, invaded England. Claiming his right to the English throne, William, Duke of Normandy, invaded England at Pevensey on Britain's southeast coast. His subsequent defeat of King Harold II at the Battle of Hastings marked the beginning of a new era in British history. 1542, Spanish explorer discovers San Diego Bay. On September 28, 1542, the Spanish explorer Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo discovered San Diego Bay while searching for the Strait of Anian, a mythical all-water route across North America. In June of 1542, Cabrillo departed from the west coast of Mexico and sailed northward to probe the complex broken coastline of the Pacific, repeatedly turning east to follow any inlet that held promise of being the strait. Cabrillo was the first European to explore many of the Pacific coast bays and inlets. Though San Diego Bay, as well as all the other inlets he subsequently explored, never led to the mythic Strait of Anian, Cabrillo did succeed in mapping many of the most important features of the California coast, although he missed discovering the San Francisco Bay. 1781, the Battle of Yorktown begins. On September 28, 1781, General George Washington, commanding a force of 17,000 French and Continental troops, began the siege known as the Battle of Yorktown against the British General Lord Charles Cornwallis and a contingent of 9,000 British troops at Yorktown, Virginia, in the most important battle of the Revolutionary War. 1891, American writer Herman Melville was born. 1895, French chemist and microbiologist Louis Pasteur was born. 1901, TV host Ed Sullivan was born. On September 28, 1901, Ed Sullivan, who would become the host of the long-running TV variety program The Ed Sullivan Show, was born in New York City. During the peak of its popularity in the 1950s and 1960s, Sullivan program showcased a wide range of entertainers, including Elvis Presley, the Beatles, Rudolph Nureyev, Jerry Lewis, and Bob Hope, and many more. And many more. 1904, a woman was placed under arrest for smoking a cigarette on New York's Fifth Avenue. 1909, cartoonist, satirist, radio and television commentator Alfred Gerald Kaplan, better known as Al Capp, was born. And as I read this, I realize that most likely only people of a certain age will even know who Al Capp was. He was best known for the satirical comic strip Lil Abner, which I read every day in the Daily Oklahoman when I was growing up. He died in 1979. 1912, W.C. Handy's Memphis Blues was published. In 1918, flu epidemic hits Philadelphia. On September 28, a Liberty Loan Parade in Philadelphia prompted a huge outbreak of the flu epidemic in the city. The best evidence indicates that the flu spread slowly through the United States in the first half of 1918, and then spread to Europe by way of some of the 200,000 American troops who traveled there to fight in World War I. By June, the flu seemed to have mostly disappeared from North America after taking a considerable toll. Over the summer of 1918, the flu spread quickly all over Europe. One of its first stops was Spain, where it killed so many people that it became known the world over as the Spanish flu. Spanish flu was highly unusual because it seemed to affect strong people in the prime of their lives rather than babies and the elderly. Symptoms were so severe that most victims were dead within 3 days, and by the end of summer about 10,000 people had died. As fall began, the flu epidemic spiraled out of control. Ports throughout the world were usually the first locations in a country to be infected. In Sierra Leone, 500 of 600 dock workers were too sick to work. Africa, India, and the Far East reported epidemics. The spread of the virus among so many people also seems to have made it even more deadly and contagious as it mutated. When the second wave of the flu hit London and Boston in September, the results were far worse than those from the previous flu strain. It hit Philadelphia so bad that the entire city was quarantined and nearly 12,000 city residents died. Overall, in the United States, 5 out of every 1,000 people fell victim to the flu. And as bad as it was here, it was worse over the rest of the world. By the time the epidemic ended, an estimated 30 million people were dead from the 1918 flu worldwide, more than from all the battles of World War I combined. 1928, penicillin discovered by Sir Alexander Fleming. Sir Alexander Fleming was a young bacteriologist when an accidental discovery led to one of the great developments of modern medicine on September 28, 1928. Having left a plate of Staphylococcus bacteria uncovered, Fleming noticed that a mold had fallen on the culture and had killed many of the bacteria. He identified the mold as Penicillium notatum, similar to the kind found on bread. In 1929, Fleming introduced his mold byproduct called penicillin to cure bacterial infections. 1934, French actress, singer, model, animal activist, and sex kitten Brigitte Bardot was born in Paris, France. Ooh la la! In 1941, Ted Williams becomes the last player to hit 400. On September 28, 1941, the Boston Red Sox's Ted Williams played a doubleheader against the Philadelphia Athletics on the last day of the regular season and got 6 hits in 8 trips to the plate to boost his batting average to .406 and became the first player since Bill Terry in 1930 to hit 400. Williams, who spent his entire career with the Sox, played his final game exactly 19 years later, on September 28, 1960, at Boston's Fenway Park, and hit a home run in his last time at bat for a career total of 521 home runs. Ted Williams was born on August 30, 1918 in San Diego and began his major league career with the Red Sox in 1939. 1941 marked Williams' best season in addition to his .406 batting average. No major league player since him has hit 400. The left fielder led the league with 37 homers, 135 runs, and had a slugging average of .735. Also that season, Williams, whose nicknames included the Splendid Splinter and the Thumper, had an on-base percentage of .553, a record that remains unbroken for 61 years, until Barry Bonds achieved a percentage of .582 in 2002. In 1942, Williams won the American League Triple Crown for highest batting average and most RBIs and home runs. He duplicated the feat in 1947. In 1946 and 1949, he was named the American League's most valuable player, and in June of 1960, he became the fourth player in American League history to hit 500 homers. He was selected to the All-Star team 17 times. Williams played his last game on September 28, 1960, and retired with a lifetime batting average of .344, a .483 career on-base percentage, and 2,654 hits. His achievements are all the more impressive because his career was interrupted twice for military service. Williams was a Marine Corps pilot during World War II and the Korean War, and as a result, missed a total of nearly 5 seasons from baseball. Can you imagine how much higher his numbers would be if he'd been here for those 5 seasons? Pretty amazing. Williams, who was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1966, managed the Washington Senators, renamed the Texas Rangers in 1972, from 1969 to 1972. And I have a Ted Williams story. We'd gone to see the Cleveland Indians play at Texas Rangers at Rangers Stadium in Arlington, Texas. Somewhere around the late 90s, early 2000s, we got lucky enough to find ourselves in a box seat between third base and home, and pretty soon my companion nudged me and said, "Oh my God, do you know who that is?" Pointing to a box a little bit in front and to the left of us. "It's Ted Williams." I stared in awe. He was not 20 feet away from us, but we were too starstruck to go speak to him. This was before I ever imagined I would live in Cooperstown and work at the Hall of Fame. Nowadays, I would totally go up to him and speak him and shake his hand and ask if I could get a selfie. But yes, later on I did move to Cooperstown and was actually working at the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum on July 5th, 2002, when the announcement came out that Mr. Williams had passed away. In 1984, the Boston Red Sox had retired his number 9, and in a controversial move, after he passed away, his son sent his father's body to be frozen at a cryonics laboratory. The author John Updike memorialized Williams' career by telling the story of his last at-bat in the short story Hub Fan's Kid Adieu, published October 22, 1960 in The New Yorker. In 1963, Roy Lichtenstein's pop art work Wham, depicting in comic book style a U.S. jet shooting down an enemy fighter, was exhibited for the first time. It would become one of the best-known examples of pop art. 1965, Fidel Castro announces that Cubans are free to leave the island. On September 28, 1965, 6 years after he led the Cuban Revolution, and 4 years after a failed U.S.-backed Bay of Pigs invasion, Fidel Castro announced that any Cuban who wished to leave the island was free to do so. With Cuban forces no longer blocking civilians from leaving, a massive wave of immigration ensued, bringing hundreds of thousands of Cuban immigrants to Florida. Poverty and political repression had brought about Castro's revolution, but so much remained the same under the new regime. As Castro became increasingly vocal about his belief in socialism and opposition to American imperialism, he faced dissent from political opponents at home and hostility from the American political establishment as well. The year after the Bay of Pigs, the United States and Soviet Union nearly went to war over the latter's placement of nuclear missiles on the island. Due to recent hostilities, many Americans assumed Castro was behind the assassination of President John F. Kennedy in 1963, although no such evidence has ever emerged. Castro refused to allow Cubans to leave for America, although a number of dissenters and supporters of the deposed Batista regime did succeed in escaping. With further anti-government protests and widespread poverty, Castro believed his society was close to the breaking point. He therefore announced on September 28 that those who wished to leave were free to do so. Immediately, several thousand refugees boarded boats at the port of Cammorca, leading to a haphazard crossing that threatened to overwhelm the U.S. Coast Guard and immigration authorities. For the next 8 years, 10 flights a week left Cuba for Miami, and many Cubans waited years for their spot on the planes. Roughly 300,000 made the trip. This mass movement of people had several major effects on both countries. Castro was able to rid the island of many dissenters, although their departure was a propaganda victory for the Americans and may have led to significant brain drain in Cuba. It also markedly changed the demographics of Miami. It was during that period that the city's Little Havana neighborhood became a permanent enclave for Cuban culture. And as of the 2010 census, 34.4% of Miami residents were of Cuban origin. In 1991, American trumpet player, composer, and band leader Miles Davis died. On September 28, 1994, 852 people died in one of the worst maritime disasters of the century when the Estonia, a large car and passenger ferry, sunk in the Baltic Sea. In 1995, Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Palestinian Liberation Organization leader Yasser Arafat signed an interim agreement concerning settlement on the Gaza Strip. And that's going to wrap it up for us today on this version of This Day in History. As always, links to my research are in the show notes. Thank you so much for watching. Give it a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And feel free to share if you found this interesting. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Come on now, you can do it. You can do it. I know you can do it. Good girl, good girl. Blah, 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 blah. Here's a pretty mug. Isn't that pretty? That'll probably be about enough about the coffee mug for a while. This is where perfectionism gets in the way. Hit that ball, you can get a home run. Don't make me squeak that pig again.